Hello everyone, Peter Smith here. I'm preaching this Sunday on Daniel chapter 6, verse 1 to 16, and I'm going to do what Paul Vanderklay does. I follow him a bit on YouTube, and he's a pastor, I'm not, but he practices sermons on YouTube. So I'm going to try the same thing. I don't know how it's going to work, and I've no idea what people are going to think about it, but I'll just give it a run through and see what it looks like. So Daniel chapter 6 in the Old Testament, it's about 550 BC this is. A fair while ago, 2,500 years ago. So starting at verse 1. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Probably money there. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him, because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king and said, "O King Darius, live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, O king, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be annulled." So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room, where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. "Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days anyone who prays to any god or man except to you, O king, would be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "The decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be annulled." Then they said to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day." And when the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to the king and said to him, "Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. And the king said to Daniel, "May your God whom you serve continually rescue you." And so it goes on, and he got put in the lion's den, and the lions didn't eat him. All the officials ends up being flung into the lion's den with all their wives and kids, and all got killed by the lions. And Daniel was delivered. So, what I want to talk about, crooked politicians. And it's a little bit to do with the United Nations. I have a friend over here who's coming to speak at this same church service, who's from the Christian Embassy. And she ministers to lots of ambassadors and diplomats and stuff, the same as I go and talk to different ambassadors and diplomats at the UN. So and I've met a few politicians, and I've actually been a government bureaucrat myself. I worked at Roads and Transport for 3 years in Tasmania. So I've been one of these people myself. Now, we don't know too much about this Darius, and there's some question about him, you see. But here we've got Daniel. What was Daniel like? He so distinguished himself among the administrators and satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. He was a good guy, and he knew how to do the job properly. But at this, the administrators and satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of governmental affairs, but they're unable to do so. Now, why are they trying to get Daniel done in? I would guess, and we don't know for sure, they were probably making a little bit of a fiddle on the side. They were probably salting away a little bit of the folding money, or the gold coins, or whatever it was back then, the silver coins, to themselves. And the king wasn't getting it, skimming a little bit off the top. But they could find no corruption in him, in Daniel, because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. So, he was the full model. Doesn't mean he was sinless. But everything that he'd done in his job as a ruler over this huge, great kingdom, this huge, big empire, it was enormous. He was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. It's amazing. He was so good. And finally the men said, "We'll never find any basis for a charge against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So they knew they had to get him because of the fact he was a believer. And this is the stitch-up. So the administrators and all the gang went to the King Darius. King Darius, live forever. With the UN you go, "Oh, Excellency," you say to the ambassadors and the distinguished delegate from this or that, or in Parliament, the honourable member for the. You always sort of got to come up with the good titles. There you go. The Aussies aren't quite so good on the titles. Forgive us. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. These lot are liars, because Daniel wasn't included, and probably a lot of other good men weren't included either. But this is what they're saying: we've all agreed. Hadn't all agreed, but they're pretending they all agreed. Now our king issued a decree, and then he put it in writing, and then and what Daniel do? Daniel obviously heard about this. This wasn't done in a corner secretly. When he learned the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room, where his window opened towards Jerusalem. And 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to God, just as he had done before. Didn't stop praying. Now, here we go. You've got the big decision. Do you obey Caesar or God? This is one of the questions that Christ was asked when should we pay taxes to Caesar. It was a trick question, trying to get him for treason against Rome. And what did the Lord say? Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, and unto God the things that are God's. And you've also got the other one it's in Acts, where the apostles do this, do a healing, and Acts 4:18 and 19, and the Sanhedrin say you're not allowed to teach in that name, Jesus, and they said, well, should we obey man or God? And they obeyed God first. Now, you notice these people snuck around to see what Daniel was doing. Now, as believers, you'll always have people watching you. I remember at Nippon Denso, there was a company secretary, Hughes. I'm trying to think of his first name now, I can't remember it. He was a sort of non-practicing Catholic. And after I got converted, he took upon it himself to watch me very closely. And if I lost my temper a little bit or did something not quite 100%, I'd get it from Hughesy. Oh, Peter, that's not very Christian. You should go and apologise. So I'd have to eat humble pie and often apologise and do this and that. And you always got people watching you. And these diplomats and ambassadors at the UN, there's people watching each other over there too. I once met the delegate from North Korea. Creepiest man I'd ever met. Found out a little later he spied on his ambassador. You see, always watch people watching. Watching gets you into trouble usually. So they came along and they found him, and then they say to the king, and they say, Daniel, who was one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the degree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. They'd got him. Now see, Daniel could have not prayed. But then they'd have lied, I'm sure, and said, yeah, he did pray, but we caught him, and they'd have all their false witnesses would have been lined up. But he did pray. See, what would you have done? If it was illegal to pray, would you still pray? Would you still pray the way you always did? With the window open, facing towards Jerusalem. Now they knew where he prayed. They knew where they could get a little spot to spy on him. See, Daniel's not doing it out in public on the street. He's going home to do it, to pray at home, as he always did. And see, what are you going to do? You're caught on the horns of a dilemma. Do you not pray? Well, they could have stitched him up and said he did pray. So he did pray, and he trusted the Lord. And this is the big one, he trusted the Lord. Then the men went as a group to the king and said, Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. They'd got him. It's a silly rule having a system like that, because normally the king has the right of clemency, and the right to forgive, but they'd got him there. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. And the king said to Daniel, May your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you. And he did. He was rescued. And I just it's a little bit further on. At the king's command, this is verse 24, just so I'll finish up a bit. The king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. So, Haman in the book of Esther, he got hung on the same gallows that Mordecai was going to be hung on. It seems like a bit of justice was done there. What these creeps were going to do to Daniel got done to them and their wives and children. And that was how it worked in those days. It wasn't just the person who did the wrong thing got punished, but wives and kids as well. And that was a pretty brutal time, pretty rugged time. So there's an example of a man who was an amazing witness and testimony, an uncorrupt governmental official. It's like, there's some about, but probably not that many. There's usually people who want to feather their own nest in their own way, or get a promotion, or all sorts of different things. And the Christian is tempted. What should you do? Now, when I worked at the transport department in Hobart for those 3 years, it was a good experience. I had a photocopy up of one of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not use the name of thy Lord in vain. God will not hold you guiltless. And they didn't like, the transport inspectors didn't like that being up there. Most of them didn't curse and blaspheme in front of me. It was hard for the Aussies. There's a lot of cursing and blaspheming out there. A bit like here in the UK, a bit the same. Maybe worse in Oz. And I had another one about obeying the state authorities from Romans 12 or 13 it is. They didn't like that either. Oh, that's just for the Christians. No, it's for everybody. Everyone's meant to obey the governing authorities. And here you got the governing authorities, and Daniel's in charge of them, and they don't want him there. He'll discover the crooks and the thieves and the people lining their own pockets, and those who are giving the good jobs to their family and everything else, and same at the UN. And see, what do you do if your president of your country comes and he's heading off on the Sunday, and do you want to go to church? Or go to the airport and say goodbye to the president and wave and be there and be seen? I've been at different Bible studies and things over in New York, and these are things that come up. See, if you want to be noticed by the president or the prime minister, and he's going away on Sunday, well, you see, you've got to make the decision. Do I go to church and worship the Lord, or do I go to the airport and wave goodbye to the president and make out like I like him, when I probably don't, but it could cost you a promotion? Going to church instead, not as keen. He's not here. Oh, he's at church. Or, oh, he's not here. I don't know where he is, And that's what happened. We all got precious. Where we work. Always people watching to see what we do. Are we a good witness or a bad witness? Are we living up to what we're meant to be doing? Well, we're all hypocrites to some degree, because it's pretty tough to do everything, perfectly, because none of us are perfect. But the non-believers will want to say, well, he's not doing everything just right, so he's a hypocrite. Oh, yep, we're guilty as charged, because we can't do everything perfect, and we never will in this lifetime, but we should try. So that's a little bit of a ramblings on about Daniel 6. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that on Sunday. Might be the same. Hard to say. But that's sort of how I preach, usually, a bit like that. So I hope you've enjoyed it. So if you have, give us a little tick as a like. And if you didn't like it, give us a thumbs down. If you don't like it, fine. I'll pop in a comment or subscribe or unsubscribe. You can do whatever you like on the internet. It's a great system for ideas going all over the world. And hopefully we'll still be able to keep doing it. Whether we all get banned or not's hard to know. But there you go. Thank you very much for watching. God bless.